Hello again. Today we're going to extend on our Getting Started video by talking about enabling historical data through Cimplicity into the Web HMI and trending that. So first of all, just a quick reminder that to get historical data pushing from Cimplicity to Historian, we enable the OPC collector and this Prophecy Historian client tools in order for that to work. So I'll just exit out of that. And then what happens is if you go into your Cimplicity project, this option is enabled for Historian OPC interface integration, which enables a Historian tab for you. And in here, you indicate your Historian credentials that you installed with. So in this case, I'm going to use localhost. I'm using my local Windows credentials here, and then of course my Cimplicity project credentials for the OPC UA, or sorry, for the OPC DA collector. Let's try that again. And we'll do a test on that. So we're connected and we have valid OPC credentials, which is great. So now that that's enabled, we can go back into, we're going to go back into our tpump class from before, and we're going to add a data item that we want to trend. And for this pump, we're going to track the flow. So we're going to create an analog virtual point in this case, and we're going to, in this case, create a calculated point, and we're going to base this just so we have some moving data on our project date second variable. Also, in order to get trends to work properly, we need to give ourselves some display limits so that the trend knows what limits to use in its trend chart. So we just can use 0 to 60 for those seconds. I'm going to apply that. So now we have a flow variable on our class that'll update our pump object. And once that's done, oh, one more thing, just before we leave here, we're going to go back into this flow. And one of the things that Cimplicity provides is a direct way to immediately start logging to Historian when you start your project. So we're going to enable that as well. So we've done that. We'll start our project so that starts logging to Historian. And now we're going to go into our Web HMI configuration and configure the Historian credentials there so that it knows how to communicate. And that's done in the config tool. We have a Historian tab. And similar to Cimplicity, we're going to configure that. We'll test that out. And that's successful, which is good. So we'll save that and exit. That'll restart our services so that those will pick up those new settings. And now we'll go back into Web HMI. Log in. And we're going to go right immediately to our administration panel to get started here. In our server aliases, before we set up a connection alias to get real-time data from Cimplicity, now we're going to create a historical connection. Call it Historian, and it's of type, server type Historian. And our address is, again, just like in Cimplicity, is localhost. So save that. So now we have an alias that we can use to map our tags to Historian tags. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to go back into our model, and in the object type for the pump, just like in Cimplicity, we're going to add the flow variable. And it's a number type. Save that. And now in our object, when we go back, you can see that flow has appeared. So we're going to go ahead and let it get real-time data, just like we did for the on-off value. And instead we're going to use flow. And in this case, we're going to use our historical alias, and we're going to get our historical data source. Now, one way to do that, just to be sure and see what Cimplicity is generated in Historian, is we're going to go to our collector, and we're going to just search and see what it should have created. So there's our getting started pump01.flow. So that's the address we need to use as our address here. So it's getting started dot pump 01.flow. Just double check that, getting started dot pump 01.flow. Alright, so that should be the address we want to retrieve our value from. So we're going to go into now our designer, and went for that particular pump type, we're going to say we want to by default trend the flow variable. Now when we go to runtime, we can see that variable is getting picked up, and it already had data in it because we started logging data back a few minutes ago when we first started our Cimplicity project. So you can see now that it's getting data and trending that because we enabled that by default. So in this bigger view, we can see that we are picking up that historical data from the time we started the Cimplicity project. Right now we're getting live updates, but through Historian, because we configured this point to be able to get historical data. If I want to, right now it's picking it up every 5 seconds. It's grabbing a value from Historian. But if I wanted to do some historical analysis, I can switch into historical mode. And in this mode, it's not kind of updating on the fly, but I can do things like change the time range, or I can go down a little bit closer, or from within, I can specify a custom duration. I can change my start time, or I can even within here use the zoom features, which include zooming by X or Y axis only. So I can keep my Y range and just say I want to zoom kind of more and more into the X direction. And that's how you do trending and get it set up in WEB HMI with Cimplicity.